Hello and welcome to episode 4 entitled The Dark Lord's Journey. I'm Adam. I'm an international fantasy sci-fi author under the name A J Dalton. I've published various novels with Golan's Orion. Empire of the Saviour is probably the best known title. I also lecture in English literature and creative writing. If you listen to some of the previous mini lectures or talks on this YouTube channel, you'll have heard about the opposition of the Dark Lord and the Chosen One that we find in science fiction and fantasy, and that goes all the way back to the Bible. But you'll have also heard in the previous mini lecture that I did, or mini chat, about how modern sci-fi and fantasy has actually shifted away from the classic model and the classic opposition of the Chosen One and the Dark Lord. So this then is the Dark Lord's journey, that shift in sci-fi and fantasy that you probably need to know about if you want to write in the genre or genres. I'll be reading today from my new title with Luna Press, The Satanic in Science Fiction and Fantasy, available from all good bookshops and probably a few bad ones as well, and of course Amazon and the Luna Press website. But I'll read a section from the start of the book so you understand the origins of the genre, and then I'll read a section from the end so that you understand where the genres are at right now. Okay? So this is from page 5. It is not until the New Testament, written 500 years after the Old Testament, that we have Satan as the distinct and named devil with which modern audiences will be more familiar. This later version of Satan is diametrically opposed to the will of God, is as monstrous as it is seductive, page 6, hang on a minute, represents sin in all its guises and only has a malign intent towards humankind. Satan is jealous of humankind. With the increased characterization of Satan's nature in the New Testament, we also have an increased amount of description of his physical manifestations. It is the New Testament that claims the serpent in the Old Testament's Garden of Eden to be one of Satan's avatars, and he is also described variously as an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns, a dragon that can spew water like a river, the beast, a demon who can possess humans, one who can mark the heads and hands of his followers, and a thorn in the flesh. These are quotes from the Bible. So he is a winged serpent. He is the serpent from the Garden of Eden, though he's not named as a serpent in the Old Testament. Therefore, the move from the Old Testament to the New Testament sees Satan go from holy agent to a being who is entirely demonic in both behavior and appearance. We must wonder what has happened in the 500 years between the writing of the Old Testament and the New Testament to cause this ideological shift in representation. A closer examination reveals that the New Testament makes certain telling references and gives us some clues. In the book of Revelation, Jesus instructs John of Patmos, a prophet, as follows: "To the angel of the church in Pergamon write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city, where Satan lives." It appears from this quote that particular problems had occurred for the Christian faith in the city of Pergamon, and that these problems were due to an evil intent or ethos personified in Satan. By understanding what happened to the Christian priest Antipas and the politics surrounding his death, we will see that the character of Satan was actually used to demonize all those who were not Christian. This construction of Satan, then, was the product of the Christian faith engaging in a form of caricature-based political propaganda. Pergamon was an ancient Greek city in what is now eastern Turkey. During the time of Antipas, who was executed in 92 AD, the city was governed by Rome and was a regional and political capital. It was the site of one of Christianity's 7 major churches in Asia Minor, but also had major temples dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, to Athena twinned with Zeus, as well as to several other Greco-Roman gods, and even to the Roman emperor himself. The city was also known as the home for the famous school of medicine, dedicated to the god of healing, Asclepius, whose symbol was the snake. Purportedly, Antipas, whose name translates as Against All, was killed by pagan priests and the followers of Serapis for refusing, when tested, to declare the Roman emperor as Lord and God above all. The manner of Antipas's death is well documented. He was placed inside a life-size metal statue of a bull. The brazen bull has been previously gifted to the city by King Attalus, and a fire was set beneath it. The screams of his death would have echoed inside the statue and sounded as if the bull was bellowing. The god was thereby brought to life by the human sacrifice. Scholars believe that the brazen bull would have been located upon the great altar of Zeus, an altar which took the form of a magnificent set of marble stairs and colonnades surrounded by a frieze of the giants and the Olympian gods battling for supremacy over the cosmos, atop the Acropolis above Pergamon. From there, the public execution could be better seen and heard by all those in the city. With Pergamon described as the home of Satan, its temples described as Satan's throne, and the murderous attack on the priest of Christianity representing the action by which the devil lives, Satan becomes the personification of all pagan or non-Christian religions and all physical and political attacks upon Christianity. Okay. And we continue. Satan is punished for what he does and thrown down to hell, which is indeed kind of Earth, which he is trying to turn into his dark empire. And so we continue on page 10. Naturally enough, the Bible cannot allow or afford to have Satan continuing to rule or thrive in Pergamon or anywhere else. The will of God has to be seen as ultimately prevailing. As the New Testament was completed in 120 AD, approximately 200 years before the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, the writers and compilers of the Bible were faced with a particular creative difficulty, since at that time Pergamon was still ruled by its Satanic Roman emperor. The only way out of that difficulty, of course, was for there to be a vision or prophecy of the future in the book of Revelation, a vision in which we see Satan defeated once more, this time once and for all. There has to be a final climactic, all-consuming battle with the complete annihilation of the enemy, thus eliminating any possible threat thereafter. In short, there must be an end of days and an end to all possibility of human sin. Inevitably, the earth as it currently is must end with the kingdom of heaven triumphing over all. And so we quote from the book of Revelation. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which he strikes down the nations. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. And 1,000 years later, we have the Crusades, when Satan is at large in the world once more. All of this is the Catholic Church taking the Bible as quite literal and as a call to arms to put Satan down once more, which is the Middle East in Christian history, I'm afraid. Okay. It is from the Bible then that we not only get the character of Satan as the Dark Lord, but also the character of the heavenly warrior as a virtuous knight upon a white horse. And this knight fights the dragon and defeats it. Surely we are put in mind of the later character of St. George, who fights the dragon and defeats the dragon. So, from the book of Revelation, we have the Dark Lord and his narrative. We have the White Knight, who is the chosen one, who defends heaven, who is virtuous, and he defeats the Dark Lord. This is the plot of classic fantasy and even science fiction, the hero's journey as it's known. But what of today? Well, today, things have changed, I'm afraid. Virtue does not win out. We have dominant fantasy subgenres like grimdark and dark fantasy. In science fiction, we have dystopian YA. We don't think that the chosen one wins anymore. We don't think that society is virtuous. We don't believe we have noble kings and queens anymore. So I shall read very briefly. Entering the 2010s, it became clear that the pain of the credit crunch and austerity was not being shared equally. Indeed, it was those working in or dependent on the public sector who were suffering most, often falling into food and energy poverty, while the middle classes working or invested in the private sector continued to award themselves healthy bonuses and send their offspring to the best fee-paying schools. There were multiple public revelations in the UK that large private companies and wealthy individuals, including the Queen, employed clever accountants who ensured they never had to pay their full tax burden. Offshore banking and tax mitigation schemes meant that the top half of society could legally, though never morally, continue to take all the benefits of society without paying the price. Indirectly, one half of society was knowingly exploiting the other half. In such a context, the subgenres of dark fantasy and metaphysical fantasy, which identified a single dark lord at the top of society, a vampiric overlord or corrupt king, and which offered an idealistic, self-doubting and self-sacrificing chosen one, and which still offered solutions based on people coming together to build the new future, were seen as naive, overly romantic, faux, wimpy, and a poor representation of the world. In the world of the 2010s, we were all dark lords, and only a cynical chosen one was ever going to survive. It was in such a context that dark fantasy and metaphysical fantasy was supplanted by the even darker dystopian YA and grimdark fantasy. And if you would like to know more, all good bookshops and a few bad ones and Amazon. Or you can check out some of my other talks on my YouTube channel, or there's my website where there are free creative writing lessons and a lot more information about sci-fi fantasy. What's your website, Adam? Oh, here it is, www.ajdalton.eu. See you.